Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of Uncivil Law. Woo! And we are here today with Impeachment Article Throwdown. 2 people enter, 1 leaves in the House of Representatives between Trump and the Democratic Party. And we are going to read the resolution written by the Intelligence Committee of the House and soon to be approved by the United States House of Representatives. Very super exciting. So this is coming from the Intelligence Committee, but has been basically approved already by Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And they are going to probably vote on this in the House before Christmas. So I'm going to guess about a week. So let's say the 19th or so probably is when the House is going to vote on this. We can expect pretty much every Democrat to vote for it, maybe minus 1 or 2. And we can expect every Republican to vote for it, probably minus none. And yeah, so it will be pretty much along party lines, although there might be a few Democratic splits. I think there are a few Democrats who've already said they're not in favor of it. So it's probably going to be something like 5 Democrats won't vote for it, and all the Republicans will vote against it. And so it will not be bipartisan. They will not get any Republican votes, I am quite sure. And we so far have heard that Mitch McConnell is saying that the Senate is going to punt. He is saying that they're going to spend about 2 weeks on this after the new year and be done with it. Now, whether or not that's true or not, of course, we have yet to see. That could be so much political bluster and so much political grandstanding to lay into a false sense of confidence or whatever. Because I still don't know if it is to the Republicans' benefit to punt this in the Senate or drag it out and make it last forever. Because they could, call their own witnesses, and they could have their own people, and they could, drag the Obama administration through and drag Biden through for whatever misdeeds he may have done, just to throw that in there because why not? So very good times. So we are going to read this 9-page impeachment resolution, which is not yet passed, but it will soon be. And this is roughly the equivalent of an indictment, of course, but it's not legal. It's political. I don't think there's the Senate filibuster chance. I wasn't suggesting Senate filibuster. I was suggesting that the Senate would just drag it out materially. They would just drag it out forever by calling in their own witnesses and just calling in people to testify for the Republicans forever about various things they want to highlight. So not necessarily that they'd filibuster it, but that they would, for example, among other things, call Joe Biden, call Hunter Biden, call anyone else, call the whistleblower, call anyone else they can think of that would be relevant in this. And I figured, why not just call on some people to testify about Benghazi, because it's not really relevant, but whatever. So I'm not sure which of those 2 options they're going to do, but let's read the resolution and see what we have. Steele dossier, exactly. Get people to testify about, maybe people from intelligence testify about the wiretaps that were allegedly done against the Trump administration during the campaign, the taps on Trump Tower, testify about other aspects of intelligence because it's the Senate. They can get all that stuff out in the open, maybe get their ambassadors to testify, maybe get the president from Ukraine to testify. Why not? All kinds of fun stuff. So yeah, everyone from the FBI, everyone from the CIA, maybe get some NSA people in there, national security advisors, get the old national security people from the Obama administration, get all, the old attorney general, get Eric Holder in there, whatever, just all bunch of people. Maybe get Obama, we'll get him to testify. That'd be good. Get him as a witness. That'd be fun. So, these are your twin options, basically. Do the Republicans punt like they're saying they're going to punt? Because what they're saying right now is they're going to punt. They're saying 2 weeks and done. Or do they drag it out forever and get all the people that I just named? And a lot of those people are going to refuse to testify. And then the Republicans are going to point right back at the Democrats and throw some of the arguments that we're going to read right in here against the Democrats. They're going to say, well, you're now obstructing because now it's your witnesses who are refusing to testify. It's your witnesses. It's Joe Biden who's refusing to testify. Hunter Biden who's refusing to testify. What about when it's your people who are refusing to testify? So some of this language that we're going to read might be very useful to the Republicans in saying, pox upon your house too. Don't throw stones when you live in glass houses, kinds of things. So, which of those two we're going to fall into, who knows? But let's read and see what we got from the wonderful House of Representatives. Resolution impeaching Donald John Trump, President of the United States, for high crimes and misdemeanors. Resolved that Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, and that the following articles of impeachment to be exhibited to the United States Senate. Articles of impeachment exhibited by the House of Representatives of the United States of America in the name of itself and of the people of the United States of America, and against Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, in maintenance and support of its impeachment against him for high crimes and misdemeanors. Article 1. Abuse of power. Well, I would note right away that our abuse of power as such is not a crime. It is political malfeasance maybe, but it's not like we're citing a provision of the United States Code. And what is abuse of power? One person's use of power might be another person's abuse of power. It might be kind of in the thing of the eye of the beholder. So let's see if the House of Representatives lay out any kind of objective standard that we can use to measure Trump's conduct and also measure other people's conduct, so we can see how Trump is liable, for lack of a better word. I guess liable is not really the best word, but I don't know of another one. So we'll go with liable. Whether or not Trump is liable under this standard and other people would not. So let's see what they came up with. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment, and the President shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors in his conduct of the office of the President of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional oath faithfully to execute the office of President of the United States, and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Well, right there I would note that presupposes that this isn't the best of his ability, which, you might quarrel with. Is he doing it to the best of his ability or not? Anyways, carrying on. And in violation of his constitutional duty to take care the laws be faithfully executed, Donald J. Trump has abused the powers of the presidency in that, using the powers of his high office, President Trump solicited the interference of a foreign government, Ukraine, in the 2020 presidential election. That's conclusory. He apparently, according to the phone call, wanted Ukraine to investigate Biden or Biden's associates, but that means it was for the purpose of the 2020 presidential election as opposed to some other purpose is a bit of a conclusory statement. And rather than saying that he solicited their help to investigate, they're making a conclusion here about the purpose behind it, right? That's what I'm pointing out. Like, it's not that he solicited interference of a foreign government in the 2020 election, because the transcript doesn't reflect that. It reflects that he asked for their help in investigating the Bidens or investigating corruption or investigating, other related things. Whether that's for the purpose of this is not reflected in the call. You see the distinction I'm trying to raise here? That they're making a conclusion about the purpose that's not really reflected in the underlying material. Normally when you talk about like criminal conduct. He's like, well, person A did act B, and that is criminal. So it should really be President Trump solicited Ukraine to do X, where X is objective on the record. Here, they're implying a purpose or motive that is not readily reflected in the objective evidence as I have seen it. So I just want to take note of that for that. By Michael Miller, yeah, it isn't a question of impeaching Biden or not, because you're right, impeachment is throwing you out of office. But it would be an issue of trying to highlight that Biden or Obama or others had done things that were known at the time would be impeachable. So it's basically to show that, like, this guy did things that would be impeachable and presumably, potentially, would be impeaching should Biden get office later, because it's not clear in the constitutional text or intent whether things that occurred before office can be impeaching material once you become office. Now, I think that you can impeach for anything. So, like, if you discover someone did something before they came into office, that may be grounds to impeach politically. So it may be grounds for impeachment in the future should he ever gain office. So, like, he can't be impeached right now, but maybe it's something that would serve to show disparate treatment or show a lack of conviction by failing to abide the same standards under both. And it could potentially be used for a future impeachment should Biden get into office, because you would have the foundational framework from the evidence to then immediately impeach on that basis. So that's like some of the technical distinctions that I'm trying to elucidate here. And guys, be nice to each other. Please don't call each other liars. It's not nice, okay? No personal attacks, all right? I think I have at least one moderator in here. Please do not get personal attacks or they can time you out. Be nice to each other. Be kind. Try to be charitable to one another, okay? You can be civil and disagree. Just please don't call each other liars. It's not nice. Let's see, where were we? He did so through a scheme or course of conduct that included soliciting the government of the Ukraine to publicly announce investigations that would benefit his re-election, harm the election prospects of a political opponent, and influence the 2020 presidential election to his advantage. Same kind of analysis we were discussing before. This is conclusory, going to kind of intent and purpose. He asked him to do X is more objective. For the purpose of Y is more conclusory. President Trump also sought to pressure the government of the Ukraine to take these steps by conditioning officials of the United States acts of significant value to Ukraine on public announcement of the investigations. President Trump engaged in the scheme or course of conduct for corrupt purposes in pursuit of personal political benefit. Okay, well, then you're again going to his motive behind the things rather than the objective act. Normally, in criminal law, motive is not an element of the crime. Motive is a sentencing enhancement, for example, in hate crimes, and it can be used also to mitigate sentencing. So if you had like a worthy motive, it can be used by a jury to occasionally mitigate stuff. But motive or purpose in and of itself is not an element of the crime. So you don't normally look to like corrupt motive normally. And also motive is a lot harder to establish than your intent or your acts. So like, the difference between motive and intent, and it's not the greatest example, but it's the one I've used before, and it's the example that comes to mind. If you're robbing a bank, the intent is to rob the bank. The motive is less clear. Why are you doing it? The motive might be because you want the money, but it also might be things like because you're bored, because you thought it might be fun, because you wanted to impress a girl, because of whatever, because, you thought, your car talked to you and said you should, so like intent is to rob the bank. Motive, the purpose behind it, is not usually an element of the crime. And these are going more to motive than to in the intent. So that's a couple notes there. He thus ignored and injured the interests of the nation. And I'd also note, like, when you talk about doing something for corrupt purposes in pursuit of personal political benefit, that also might implicate like a lot of politicians in a lot of actions. Like most politicians are at least factoring in personal benefit when they're voting on stuff, right? They're not voting on stuff without thinking about how it's going to potentially impact their reelection chances, right? So like you normally have at least some personal political benefit. Like presumably the Democrats in crafting this motion presumably think it's going to be to their political. Okay, that should be better. So hopefully that is not going to be a problem. Yeah, it looks much better on my end. All right, sorry about that. Let's go back up a little bit. With the same corrupt motives, President Trump, acting both directly and through his agents within and outside the United States government, conditioned two official acts on public announcement that he had requested the release of $391 million of United States taxpayer funds that Congress had appropriated on a bipartisan basis for the purpose of providing vital military and security assistance to Ukraine to oppose Russian aggression, and which President Trump had ordered suspended. And a head of state meeting at which the White House, with which President of Ukraine sought to demonstrate continued United States support for the government of Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. So back again, they're going back to, it seems to me, they're going back to this corrupt motive, right? So they're going like these corrupt motives, President Trump did things. So it seems like the way I'm reading this, that they're not really complaining about the underlying acts, because it's not like he did these things, therefore they're inherently wrong. It's more because he had these motives that makes him wrong. So they're going more to like to motive rather than intent and act. So it's like because he had this corrupt motive, that's what makes it wrong. If he had had a pure motive, it might have been different. So they're relying on his underlying motive as part of their theory of the case, rather than saying, rather than like intent and act, rather than mens rea and actus reus, we're talking about purpose and motive. And again, motive is not usually an element of a criminal offense. The law doesn't typically care why you do something. It just cares that you did it with the right mental intent statement and the right actions. So it's a little bit odd to see it in a proceeding, but okay. Faced with the public revelations of his actions, President Trump ultimately released the military and security assistance to the government of Ukraine, but has persisted openly and corruptly urging and soliciting Ukraine to undertake investigation for his personal political benefit. You guys will have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the timing on that doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right that he ultimately released the military and security assistance because he was faced with public revelation of his actions. The timing on that sounds wrong. I don't think that like he was releasing it because he was being threatened with exposure. I think he released it because, among other things, it was coming to the end of the fiscal year, and it had to be released or it would expire by law. So I don't think it was necessarily they're implying a particular reason for his actions faced with the public revelation of actions that he did this, that I don't think is borne out by my understanding of the timeline. That was the reasoning. It doesn't seem quite right on the time frame as I understand it. These actions were consistent with President Trump's previous invitations of foreign interference into United States elections. So I'll just go back to a couple comments. Let's see. Some people are saying it's a coup. It's not a coup. No, they're following the rules. As I've pointed out a couple times, like the rules as such are kind of made up, right? The Constitution just simply says the House can impeach and the Senate can try, and like beyond that, it leaves it pretty open. So yeah, the rules are pretty thin. As I was saying in my last video on the subject, the rules are kind of made up. So yeah, we're making it up, but yeah, they're following the constitutional process. But yeah, um, let's see what else. Let's see, expose. Yeah, yeah. It seems to me that they've expressed impeachment since he was sworn in, and frankly before that. A lot of people have been talking about this since day one. So but the legitimacy of it is political in the same way the process is political. So like, the people are ultimately the judge of whether it's legitimate or not. So like, if the people in the next election, don't validate it by, presumably not voting for the president, then it was illegitimate because the political result or the political check is ultimately the people, and so it will be judged illegitimate by the voters or not. And it doesn't necessarily follow that them throwing him out of office because it was legitimate, but it's a political check on the process, right? So, yeah. Now, Ewan Marshall says by law they had to release it 90 days. That didn't happen. Ewan, I would say that that's only partially true. There is a law that specifically gives the President of the United States power to delay release of funds under certain circumstances for certain times. And I believe you're right that under that particular statute, it's a 90-day period. But what is it? Expressio unius non est expressio alteris. To express one does not exclude the other. Basically says just because there's a statute saying explicitly that you have power in one respect doesn't mean that you don't have power in other respects. Like if I gave you a letter that says you have the power to walk my dog, it doesn't necessarily imply that you don't have power to do other stuff. That might be part and parcel of that, picking up my dog, returning my dog, giving water to my dog, if my dog is injured, taking him to a vet or something, right? So like, to say you have power to do one thing doesn't necessarily exclude other powers. And this was going into what I was saying into my earlier impeachment video. There's an idea of like reserve powers and inherent powers of the presidency. So there's certain like minimum powers the president has that Congress can't take away. Congress can extend power, but they can't take away a certain minimum amount of power from the president. Like he has reserve power to do some things, regardless of whether the Congress says he does or not. So, like the operative question might be not just what does the statute say, but the operative question might be, well, does the presidency have some kind of reserve power to withhold this money, even though there's maybe not a statute that says he can? So, it doesn't necessarily need to be a statute for him to do stuff. And the argument that he would have the power to do this stuff would be in his role as head of state. He's the head of state. And foreign relationships are the peak of the president's domain. Like domestic relationships are much more Congress's domain. Foreign relationships are much more the president's domain, all things being equal. I mean, the president can like recognize countries and de-recognize countries. He can say, yes, you're a country that exists, and no, you're not a country that exists. That's a lot of power. And I'm pretty sure there's not a statute that says he can do that, but he can. So like, can the president withhold money for certain purposes? Maybe. So I don't think it's as clean as saying, well, the statute says this. Well, the statute doesn't exclude the other thing. And even if it did exclude the other thing, you'd still have to ask the question, because even if it said, oh, by the way, this is all the power the president has, you'd still have to ask the question, well, does he have reserve power that Congress can't take away? Because the case for that, by the way, is a case called Youngstown Steel that basically sets up this, if you want to read it. Basically says there's Youngstown Steel. When Congress has given power to the presidency is at its zenith. When they've said nothing, it's in some sort of middle state. And if the Congress tries to take away all the power, then it's at some sort of base level that they can't remove from. So Youngstown Steel is basically the case that says that there's some sort of reserve, fundamental power of the president. So yeah, even when there's statutes that say the president can't do certain things, you still have to ask, well, like, is that true? Because this is like separation of powers. The president has some sort of inherent power that Congress can't touch. What exactly that is, who knows? But yeah, it's a good point. Let's see what else. Yeah, let's see. So there's the Mueller report. Yeah, justice position. Mueller didn't even write the report. Proved a nothing burger. Yeah, the law again and the politics are separate from it. Congress can do whatever it likes. Let's see what else. Embarrassed and saddened. Fair enough. I agree from the opposite viewpoint. Fair enough. The Congress required, well, if it doesn't even matter if he's as bad as it is. Left said he lied, and so often maliciously. Yeah, fair enough. Impeachment could bar an Article 2 check. Yeah, that's exactly like, well, it's an article, well, depending on which way you're viewing it. But yeah, impeachment, like, as far as I'm concerned, legally, Congress can impeach just because they don't like the president and they don't like what he's doing. It's a higher bar than throwing out a prime minister. It's a higher bar than just, asking for a vote of no confidence, but it's the same kind of principle. In principle, they can do like anything they want. What high crimes and misdemeanor means is open to interpretation. And because the Constitution says the House is the sole power to give impeachment and the Senate is the sole power to try, in this person's humble opinion, Congress has the power to define what that means, and no one can check them. So good times have by all. Wherefore, President Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated he will remain a threat to national security and the Constitution if he's allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. Well, we did have an election, but yeah. President Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, and profit under the United States. Very exciting. Now let's get to Article 2. So in Article 1, we learned about corruption of power. So Article 1 notes that we will go back to summary of the notes. Article 1 notes are that they go a lot to his motive and his purpose behind it, rather than like a crime. It's, first of all, it doesn't like cite a statute. I think we can all agree on that, right? It doesn't cite like some provision of the US Code or some provision of the CFR or like even like an executive order. It doesn't cite like he violated this document and this document has these elements and he violated each of these elements in this exact way. So it's not like laying it out as a crime. Now, Congress doesn't have to do that, but I think we can agree on that much. It's not laying it out that way. Second thing of note is that they're going a lot to his purpose or motive behind it rather than what you classically consider to be intent or acts. It's not like, it's not that he did something negligently, recklessly, knowingly, purposefully. These would be mens rea's words, right? These are 4 mens rea words you typically look for in any criminal statute. Negligently, recklessly, knowingly, purposefully. So normally you're looking for one of those 4 things. We did not see any of those 4 words. So we did not see any of the 4 classical mens rea steps. And we also didn't see a statement of objective acts where he did act A, act B, act C. The equivalent of walking into the bank, demanding the money, obtaining the money from the teller, that kind of thing if we're talking about bank robbery. So it's not like laying it out of element A, element B, element C. So it's not laying out the 4 classic mens rea in terms of classic mental intent. It's going instead to motivation, which, as I was pointing out earlier, is not classic element of criminal law. The law normally doesn't care about motive. It only cares about one of those 4 statements of intent and some statements of acts. Your ultimate reasons are your own, and the law doesn't really care. So we note that. And also is a little vague because it like, what defines a corrupt purpose and what defines a legitimate purpose? Is it in Congress's view or the House's view? Is it in the House's view that anytime you're doing something for personal political gain that inherently makes it a corrupt purpose? Or are those 2 separate things? Is it corrupt purpose and you're doing it for gain? Or are those the same thing? Because if you're doing it for gain and that inherently is corrupt purpose, then I'd argue that most politicians are corrupt pretty much all the time, because pretty much every vote is at least some way calculated with respect to your political chances. So it's calculated with respect to, and one could argue that's like a good thing. Politicians should be responsive to the will of the people, right? So if you're voting for something because the people will like it, and that furthers your political interest, and the people do like it, and it gets you reelected, isn't that good? So it's like it doesn't seem like it can be that just because it benefits you personally or politically that it makes it corrupt. So they're going to this like nefarious intent element that's not very well delineated in my view. It makes it a little bit hard to say what Congress thinks corrupt intent is. What does that mean? How do you define corrupt intent from legitimate intent? So these are some weaknesses I see in the way it was laid out. So yeah. Yeah, and Matthew, please make sure that people are being relatively civil to each other. Please make sure that people aren't calling each other liars. You know, we can disagree. People can talk about stuff, but let's not imply motives to others, right? Let's not imply motives to others. Let's assume that people are disagreeing charitably, and let's try to be nice to each other. And Matthew, you can feel free to time people out if they are not doing that, because I don't want ugliness in my chat. All right, let's go on to Article 2. Obstruction of Congress. Very exciting. The Constitution provides that House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment, and the President shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors in his conduct of the office of the President of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional oath faithfully to execute the office of the President of the United States, and to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care the laws are being faithfully executed. Donald J. Trump has directed the unprecedented, categorical, and indiscriminate defiance of subpoenas issued by the House of Representatives pursuant to its sole power of impeachment. I'm pretty dubious on this. President Trump has abused the powers of the presidency in a manner offensive and subversive to the Constitution in that the House of Representatives has engaged in an impeachment inquiry focused on President Trump's corrupt solicitation of the government of Ukraine to interfere in the 2020 United States presidential election. As part of this impeachment inquiry, the committees undertaking the investigation served subpoenas seeking documents and testimony deemed vital to the inquiry from various executive branch agencies and officials and current and former officials. In response, without lawful cause or excuse, President Trump directed executive branch agencies, office, and officials not to comply. Well, you know, this is like not new. I mean, the context is a little bit different, that it's an impeachment inquiry, but you know, the executive branch telling people not to cooperate with subpoenas or not to testify or not to like appear or not to produce documents has been a thing that has definitely existed. To bring a note to this, because it's the only example I can remember off the top of my head. I'm sure it's not the exclusive example, but I will bring one that comes to mind. During President Obama's term, then Attorney General Eric Holder was asked to turn over documents dealing with the Fast and Furious gun running scandal. So the Department of Justice apparently decided it would be a good idea to knowingly allow people who are prohibited from buying firearms to buy said firearms and then to smuggle them into Mexico with the thought that somehow we were going to trace the guns and something, arrest bad guys eventually. And some of the gun dealers actually called the ATF and said, ATF, this seems kind of suspicious. And the ATF said, no, it's totally cool. We want you to give those guns. And then some of those guns were used to shoot United States law enforcement personnel. So, you know, not a great time. The United States House of Representatives, then under Republican control, issued a subpoena to Eric Holder to come and testify and show up with documents. And he did none of those things. And, you know, the House of Representatives held him in contempt for all the good it did. So that is an example. I'm sure it's not the only example, but, you know, the idea of like the executive branch telling other members of the executive branch not to come and not to testify with subpoenas is definitely not a uniquely Trump issue. So, good times. President Trump thus interposed the powers of the presidency against lawful subpoenas of the House of Representatives, and assumed to him the functions and judgment necessary to exercise the sole power of impeachment vested in the Constitution and the House of Representatives. Just because you have the sole power of impeachment does not, in and of itself, necessarily imply that anyone has to, in particular, help. You may have the sole power to do stuff, but that does not necessarily imply that you can, do stuff to accomplish that objective. So it doesn't quite follow that because you have the sole power to impeach, you have constitutional implicit authority to, get a document you want. So don't quite follow the logic there. President Trump abused the powers of his high office through the following means: directing the White House to defy a lawful subpoena by withholding the production of documents sought by the committees. Fast and Furious, again, as an example. Not a unique example, but as an example. Directing other executive branch agencies and offices to defy lawful subpoenas and withhold the production of documents and records from the committees, in response to which the Department of State, Office of Management Budget, Department of Energy, and Department of Defense refused to provide a single document or record. See what I said before. Directing current and former executive branch officials not to cooperate with the committees, in response to which 9 administrative officials defied subpoenas for testimony, namely a whole bunch of people. See what I just said. These actions were consistent with President Trump's previous efforts to undermine the United States government's investigation into foreign interference into United States elections. Throughout these actions, President Trump sought to arrogate to himself, nice word, the right to determine the propriety, scope, and nature of the impeachment inquiry into his own conduct, as well as the unilateral prerogative to deny any and all information to the House of Representatives in the exercise of its sole power of impeachment. Just as an aside, I'd be interested to know if the Clinton administration, for example, in any way did not respond to some of the House subpoenas, because, it can't be logically the case that it's only when you don't respond to all of them that it becomes a problem, right? Presumably, if you don't respond to any of them, it's equally a problem, because it would go as just as much to Congress's power, right? It's not because you defied a certain quantum that suddenly becomes a problem. It's not like if the president denies 10% of subpoenas, that's okay. But if he denies 50% of subpoenas, well, that's where it's an abomination, right? That's not where authority goes. And to parallel this, it doesn't work that way in a court. It doesn't work that way in a court. If you're under a court subpoena and you say, I'm not going to turn over 10% of the records requested, it's not like the court goes, that's totally cool. But if you fail to turn over 50%, the court goes, well, now you're in real trouble. That's really not how that works. So this is presumably an all or nothing proposition. So, I'd be interested to know if the Clinton administration did not respond to any or all the subpoenas, and, what do the Democrats right now think of that? Do they think that was okay, and if why? And why were those refusals legitimate, but these refusals illegitimate? What is the legal or logical difference? How do you separate them logically? How do you using a consistent set of principles, how do you say one is bad and the other is good? Or are they both bad? Do you now think that it was wrong? And what did you say at the time? Because, again, as a lawyer, I work on precedent. Lawyers work on precedent. We work on things that happened before. So asking questions like, well, what happened last time? And how did people respond? What were the arguments last time is totally legitimate for a lawyer to do. Because it's well, we want, in law at least, to try to be consistent. We try to operate based on precedent and try to apply justice equally to everyone, which means that we try to do the same thing every time. And now, obviously, that isn't always possible, and we sometimes fall short of that, but it is a goal. And here it's are they even trying to be consistent? It doesn't seem like they are. So, in the history of the Republic, no president has ever ordered the complete defiance of an impeachment inquiry. I struggle to agree that there is a meaningful difference between defiance and complete defiance. Again, I don't think that some defiance is okay, but complete defiance is not okay, is a intellectually consistent argument. So, yeah. Of the impeachment inquiry sought to obstruct and impede so comprehensively the ability of the House of Representatives to investigate high crimes and misdemeanors. This abuse of office served to cover up the president's own repeated misconduct and seize the control of the impeachment. You know, again, normally, like at least in criminal law, people don't have an obligation to help you indict them. So there's that. And thus nullify a vital constitutional safeguard vested solely in the House of Representatives. In all this, the president has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president and subservient constitutional government, to the great prejudice of the cause of the law and justice and manifest injury of the people of the United States. Okay, and now we're going to get to a final clause, and I would like to take note of one other thing, because I was waiting to see if it would be mentioned, and it wasn't, and I will take note of this. You know, a lot of these subpoenas, as far as I'm aware, it's not necessarily that they've openly defied. Now, I could be mistaken, but at least in a lot of these cases, and maybe all, what happened is they went to the courts to like challenge the subpoena, which is like incidentally what you do in a court. Like if you get a subpoena and you don't want to respond to it, the way you solve that problem is by going to the court and saying, I don't want to respond to the subpoena. And you lay out reasons why you don't want to respond to the subpoena. Now, that's not obstruction of justice. That's part of justice. It's part of like your part of the process, because the subpoena might be unduly broad. It might relate to materials that are privileged. It might relate to materials that are irrelevant. It might relate to materials that are too personal. It might be too burdensome. It might be a whole bunch of things, right? So like the idea of you getting a subpoena and then turning around and saying, well, no, I'm not actually going to comply with the subpoena. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go to the court and I'm going to file a motion to quash the subpoena, to use a very fancy word. I'm going to quash the subpoena and see if they respond. And sometimes the court says yes, and sometimes they say partially, and sometimes they say no. But like going to court and saying, I don't want to comply with the subpoena is not considered obstruction of justice. It's considered part of justice. It's considered part of due process. So to the extent the Trump administration people who have been noted have gone to the courts, because I know there have been some court proceedings on this, to the extent they have gone to courts and said, I don't want to respond with the subpoena, and the courts have said, you have to respond with the subpoena, and to the extent they're in appeal of that order, and those like decisions are not final, because there's still appeal avenues valid, that does not strike me as obstruction in a legal sense. Now, again, Congress can like internally define obstruction any way it wants, because again, it's political, not legal. I'm just saying that if we're going to a legal standard of obstruction of Congress, going to a court and say, but I don't wanna, is not obstruction. That's like part of your due process. I could get a subpoena from Congress and I could be like, I don't wanna, and go to court and say, please don't make me. And the court will judge it based on its own merits. Or not, they'll say it's a political question, but either way, like I at least have the option to ask. So it's not obstruction to say, but I don't want to, if what you're doing is saying, I don't want to a court, and let the court figure it out. So to the extent that they're complaining that they're obstructing by going to court to quash the subpoenas, then like, you know, as a lawyer, I'd say that's not obstruction. That's just like normal. Anyways, carrying on. Wherefore, President Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated he will remain a threat to the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. President Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of trust or profit under the United States. Okay, well, that is the end of the articles of impeachment. So, now, if you are a Republican and you are looking at this as the equivalent of an indictment, and you're saying, like, some of the things I've said, presumably, like, this part doesn't make sense, and this part doesn't make sense, and this part's a little vague, and this part doesn't really seem to hold standards, and wait a second, this doesn't really seem to comport what we did last time, and last time there were these arguments, and last time we made those arguments, and there's this inconsistency and that inconsistency, and the whole thing is a little bit subjective, and it's not really a violation of any law because we didn't see any. I definitely did not see the phrase U.S. code pop up once, in any of that stuff. So if you're a Republican and you're saying, well, I'm not going to convict because of all the reasons I just said, then that's not, to me, illegitimate. That seems very legitimate because there we go. It seems very legitimate because the weaknesses of how this is written. It's written, the malfeasance of office stuff is subjective. There's no real way to judge that. To the extent you're judging it strictly, it would seem to imply all politicians. And it's unclear how you would divide it from legitimate motives that favor the self versus unlegitimate interests that favor the self. And the whole obstruction of Congress thing seems off point because, both parties have done this to varying degrees, and to the extent that they're going to the courts and getting them involved, that seems fully legitimate. So that seems what I think about that. So let's see what other comments there were as I enjoy my beer. Let's see. I'm very, very happy that you guys are chatting as much as you are. I just want you to be nice to each other, but I very much value the chats. It's very nice. Thank you. The economy is supposed to be good. I live in a tourist spot. I do see more people. Economy is pretty freaking great. Unemployment is very, very low. Minority unemployment is very, very low. Stock market is rising, and there's currently no end in sight. There was some economic indicators about 6 months ago that suggested it would be coming to an end. But right now, the economic indicators are looking really, really positive. There's no immediate end in sight. So the economy is pretty freaking good right now. Let's see. There's some argument about China for some reason. I do think capitalism is the best system. How regulated that system should be is a whole nother question. On economic policy, I tend to be more in favor of the Chicago school than the Austrian school of economics, for those of you who are economic majors. So I prefer Chicago school economics. Yeah, executive privilege regarding subpoenas, that too. It's a whole nother scope. Yeah, and it's definitely, as Matthew pointed out, it's a thing the executive made up, but they made it up for a long time. So let's see. Normally the next valve will be the next election. I mean, yeah, the next election is 11 months away. It's like we could just let that decide. So, yeah, I'm not sure why we're doing this. I have a sneaking suspicion that if Trump gets reelected, this will not be the last time Trump will get impeached. So I have a sneaking suspicion that Trump will be the first president ever, if he gets reelected, to be impeached more than one time. So I think we can look forward to yet another impeachment trial at some point in the future. Good times. Almost, Matthew said, almost sounds like gross negligence and negligence draw a parallel. They just doing it super bad. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I wish they would have thrown out one of these terms and stop talking about motive, because motive is usually not an element. And how do you separate good motive and bad motive? And to the extent you have multiple motives, is it that any amount of bad motive poisons the whole well? Because then you're in a world where, again, you are in the world of most politics. Someone gave me a super chat. I will get to it in a moment. Let's see. Yeah, just don't ignore a subpoena. Yeah, don't do that. Governments have power. Power corrupts. Yes, it does. All right. BC Burger says, welcome to the 106th Congress where the rules are made up and the points don't matter. Yes, Big C Burger, that is what impeachment does, where the rules are made up and the points don't matter. And at least to me, as a lawyer, this feels very weak. Like, when they impeached Clinton, they charged him with perjury. Perjury is like a crime. It has actual definitions to it. And, like, it's something you can look and say, well, did he meet these elements? And now it's a political judge, but at least you're like basing it on stat, and they based it on obstruction of justice rather than obstruction of Congress. Because again, obstruction of justice, like obstruction in the U.S. Code, is a lot easier to define. And so there was some stuff in there that was criminal in nature, and some stuff that was obviously political in nature as well. But like, this feels just totally political. There's nothing in here that like screams to me as a lawyer like something I can analyze for elements and be like, I mean, where's the bribery statute, for example? Where's the charge of bribery? We didn't charge him with that. Okay. So, like, I can't even analyze that. This is lame. If they try to impeach him a second time, it just doesn't seem politically prudent. While that isn't stopping them the first time. The question: if politicians don't even follow the laws, why shouldn't anyone else? Well, you should again. You have to go. This isn't about politicians not following the law. This is about the president of the United States and his following the law. And as I was saying earlier in the stream, when you're looking at the president of the United States, there's a separation of powers issue that you don't normally have to analyze for anyone else. No one else do you have to ask these kinds of questions for. But the president is in a unique position because he's the head of the executive branch. And so, like, he is a co-equal branch of Congress, which means that there are limits to how much Congress can impose on him, just in the same way there are limits to how much the president could impose on Congress or impose on the courts. You know, these are checks and balances, right? They're all checked and balanced with each other. So, you know, when you're reading a statute, you know, like anyone else, you would have to like find a statute for it and you'd read the statute. But with the president, you have to ask questions like, wait a second, can Congress limit the president in this way? Is this statute, when applied to the president, lawful? Because the president has certain reserved powers, the chief among which are usually foreign relations. That's usually the height of powers, and military powers, which I guess is foreign relations too, for that matter. So like domestic matters, the president's power is much weaker. Foreign powers, the president's is much stronger. So when the president is in dealing with foreign relations, whether that's diplomatic or military, the president's power is much higher. And so like, you can have a statute where it says the president can withhold money for up to 90 days. And you say, oh, the statute says the president can withhold money for up to 90 days. And then I say, yeah, but maybe he can hold it for more than that. And you say to me, but because of what statute? And I say, well, there isn't one. And then you would say, wait, there's no statute. That means he can't do it. And I say, aha, you might be wrong because maybe this is an issue where the president has reserved powers. You know, just because he doesn't have a statute telling him he can doesn't mean he can't, because again, it's balance of powers, right? The executive has some kind of powers that Congress doesn't have to lay out. He has inherently. So Congress doesn't have to give it to him, and Congress can't take it away. So like, just because there are laws doesn't necessarily restrict the president because of the whole separation of powers problem. So that is the issue with the presidency as opposed to like anyone else. When the president is doing stuff, you have to ask separation of powers problems. So you have to say, well, can Congress restrict the president in this way? Is the statute valid against the president? You know, does the president have some kind of inherent power so we can defy a statute? He can do something directly against the statute and it's illegal. And we've actually seen examples of that in the past. So, you know, there's all kinds of complications when it comes to the president. And the reason is because of separation of powers. And so you have to ask questions when it comes to the president you wouldn't normally have to ask. So, yeah. Yeah. I want Trump to be out as much as the next liberal, but I feel this is sloppy. Yeah, I think it is pretty sloppy. Um, so, what precedents could be set if this were a basement for impeachment? That's always a reasonable question to be asked, because like anytime you do anything, makes it easier to do the next thing. So, like, it makes it very hard if the Republicans want to use this as a map for the next time. Because it's very thin. So, it's it does lay out a precedent in that respect. Um, yeah. Impeachable offense is anything you get the simple majority in the House to agree on. I think that's exactly right. I'm hard pressed to think of an example where the House could do something and a court would step in. I'm hard pressed to think of like the House impeaches him because he was wearing a red shirt one day, and you go to court and they say, but that's not an impeachable offense. And I'm having a real hard time seeing a court say, you're right. I'm seeing a much easier time court saying, go away forever. Not my issue. Please never ask me. Don't ever ask me these questions. I go away. That's more. Yeah, yeah, yeah. This sets a bad precedent because Republicans could pull this with Dems wins. That's exactly my problem. It was funny, or maybe not, depending on your point of view, but when the Democrats were killing the filibuster for lower court judges, you can go back and listen to the Senate debates on that. And I think it was Mitch McConnell, but someone will quote me if I'm wrong. But Mitch McConnell, or maybe it was Lindsey Graham, one of them, was basically saying, if you do this, if you kill the filibuster for these lower judges, you're going to come to regret it. And you're probably going to come to regret it sooner than you think. And it turned out they were right, because a few years later, the Republicans killed the filibuster for the Supreme Court. And they basically just pulled out the script the Democrats had used and the Democrats really didn't have a position to object because they had done it first. So it becomes easier every time. So, once one party does something politically, it becomes much easier for the next one. So, there's some Pandora's boxes you may not want to open. I feel really bad for Roberts, as there's a non-zero chance he will end up a Senate for impeachment bidding Tuesday. That's pretty funny, if not dark, but yeah. But fortunately for Roberts, they don't normally start impeachment hearings until 1 o'clock. And also, fortunately for Roberts, the Supreme Court is right across the street from the U.S. Capitol building, so he can still have his morning U.S. Supreme Court session and then walk across the lawn to the Capitol and get there in time. So there's that. I guess that's nice. Let's see. Cody says, I think with its politically polarized, insulated climate, the logical closure point is regardless of who started it. Yeah, that's true. Both parties are super short-sighted. Yeah, they do. We need more than two parties into the run. Man, if I could get one constitutional amendment passed, it would be for some kind of ranked voting or some kind of multi-voting. Ranked choice voting, approval voting, some sort of concordant voting. I don't really care. Anything is better than the first past the post. I think if we got some sort of a preferential choice voting system of some kind in there, it would solve many, many problems, because even if the two parties remained largely in control, the people who got elected would be a lot different, because the people who win the primaries would be a lot different. So I think, if we could get some sort of preferential voting system into the Constitution, that would be my one wish for the Constitution. And also, it would kind of make gerrymandering moot, because it make gerrymandering much, much harder because of the multiple preference thing. So that would be nice. So, if I could have one wish, it would be for multiple preference. And if you're interested in this, fairvote.org is a non-for-profit that deals with this. So you can go to fairvote.org and give them money to help promote it. And we'll see what Maine does and see if they can convince others. Let's see. All right. So I hope this was an enjoyable stream. I'm not sure why I'm having such bad allergies right now, so I apologize for my allergy issues. If you like the stream and you have not already done so, if you could please give the channel a like, I would very much appreciate it. It does help. And you can also go visit me in Facebook, on Discord, and on Twitch. The links are in the description below if you've not already done that, to sign up to those things, and we'll be all good. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed my analysis, as always. I hope you enjoy what I'm doing. I'm always happy for feedback, always helpful for ways to make the channel better. Um, but yeah, um, I really appreciate it. Evil Coleslaw. Evil Coleslaw. You've been good for a while. I think that you need to be a mod for a little bit. So we're going to add you as a mod for a little bit, so that you can exact your blood pressure remedies onto others. So you can be a mod for a little, and you can wreak your havoc on others. But I appreciate it as always. Hope you're well. And until next time, my friends, I wish you well. Till there. Cheers and goodbye.